Welcome to this series of videos which are titled Draw with Ranga. In this video, let's look at how to take Spring Boot applications to the cloud. You have a number of Spring Boot applications. They can be a web application, they can be a REST API, they can be a full stack application. How do you take these applications to the cloud? How do you deploy them to Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud Platform or Azure? In this video, we would focus on taking simple applications live. If you are interested in microservices, we have some other videos which would help you to take microservices to the cloud. I'll put a few links down to them in the description of this video. But this video is solely focused on taking simple web applications, simple REST API or simple full stack applications out to the cloud. Let's start from the beginning. Why do you want to use the cloud? Why do we need to use cloud? Today, we all know the most popular cloud platforms are AWS, GCP and Azure. Why do we go for the cloud? There are a few important reasons. The number one reason is on-demand resource provisioning. So I'll call this on-demand provisioning of resources. Why is on-demand provisioning important? The reason why on-demand provisioning is very important is because loads on the application keep changing during the year. Amazon will have a lot of load during, let's say, the Thanksgiving Day or the Black Friday, and rest of the year, most of the infrastructure would be sitting idle. So if you are a big enterprise and you buy 10,000 servers to satisfy your peak load, what would it be doing when you don't have the peak load? It would be sitting idle. So that's reason number one. Cloud enables on-demand resource provisioning. The reason number two why cloud became very popular these days is something called undifferentiated heavy lifting. So I'll write it down, undifferentiated, I hope I'm getting the spellings right. So it's undifferentiated heavy lifting. What is undifferentiated heavy lifting? Typically, when you are running a business, let's say you are an insurance company or you are a shopping platform provider. You would want to focus on your business areas. Things like microservices, things like infrastructure which is needed to run your microservices, things like the servers you would need to run these applications, these are not differentiation for you. You are doing a business, and technology for most of the times is not really differentiating for you, right? So that's the reason why as an enterprise you are supposed to avoid things which do not give any differentiation for you. Things like container orchestration, things like microservice platforms, things like microservice infrastructure, these do not give you any advantages over your competitors. So all these undifferentiated heavy lifting you should avoid, and cloud helps you to do that because each of the cloud platforms provides a number of ways you can avoid undifferentiated heavy lifting. If you want to create a database and you would want to manage it, if you want to take regular backups, if you want to make sure that it's available all the time, all that work the cloud can take care of you. The cloud platform can take care for you. You don't really need to focus on all that stuff. You can really focus on doing the things which makes a difference for your business. So that's reason number two why cloud is becoming popular. The third and the most important reason is availability. If you are a small enterprise or if you are a startup, it's very difficult for you to have presence across the world. So if you want to have servers across the world, it's not easy. But with the cloud, you can, with a click of a button, you can have servers in multiple availability zones and regions. So you can have servers in Asia, Europe, North America, South America, Australia, whichever place you would want, Africa, whichever continent you would want to have your servers in, you can have them, you can serve the customers down there. And all that with a click of the button. And because of this, you can get high availability for your applications, and also you would get high performance from your applications. So that's the reason why we go for the cloud. Now, in this video, as we said before, we will focus on simple applications, right? A web application, a REST API, or a full stack application. When you want to deploy a simple application to the cloud, what are the options that you have? Now think about this. How do you deploy an application right now in your data center? You will have physical hardware where your servers inside your data center, this is what is called physical hardware, and you would probably have some kind of virtualization. So if you are using any of the virtual machine concepts, you would be using some kind of virtual hardware, and you would have an operating system running on top of this. On top of it would be application runtime. So if you are running a Java application, you would need a JDK, maybe you need a Tomcat server. All that stuff is what is runtime, and on top of it is where your applications are all running. So when you are running everything in your data center, you are responsible for every part of this. So as an enterprise, you are responsible for the physical hardware, for the virtualization, for the operating system, for the runtime, and also installing your applications on top of it. Now, when you go to the cloud, you have two options. One option is called IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service. Typically, let's say we have multiple cloud providers, right? So AWS, GCP, you also have Azure. All these offer infrastructure as a service. Basically, in the infrastructure as a service, what happens is the platform provider, the cloud platform provider would actually provide you these two things. So they provide a physical hardware and they'll provide a virtualization on top of it so that you can actually access and probably install everything that you would want. You are responsible for rest of this stuff. This is what is IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service. You'll be given a server. The server, a virtual server in different cloud platforms is called different things. So a virtual server in AWS is called EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud. In GCP, the same virtual server is called Compute Engine. On Azure, it's called Azure Virtual Machine. So the names are different, but finally they are virtual servers where you can actually have an operating system, you can install all the software you need and install your applications. So if you're doing IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service, what you would do is you would get a few servers from the cloud. You will ask AWS, give me EC2 instances, GCP, give me compute engines. You will do that, and then what you would do is you would install your respective operating system, or you would install the software you would need and then install the apps. But the thing which we already talked about is we want to avoid undifferentiated heavy lifting, and that's where the cloud platforms also offer a PaaS. A PaaS is called Platform as a Service. So PaaS, in PaaS, the cloud provider is responsible for all the things up to the application runtime. So you can say, I would need a Tomcat server installed on a Windows machine, and the cloud provider would provide you that, and you can directly deploy the applications on it. And the cloud provider would be responsible for all the maintenance, availability, and everything related to your operating system and also the runtime. So if there is a new Java version or new security patch, the cloud provider would be responsible for installing all that stuff. So in Platform as a Service, the cloud provider provides the entire platform to you, and all that you need to manage as a customer is just the top. So I'll just highlight with a orange thing this stuff. So this is what you are responsible for in PaaS, but in IaaS you are responsible for all this stuff, right? So that's the huge difference between IaaS and PaaS. And the PaaS solutions which are typically offered on the different cloud platforms are in AWS, it's called Elastic Beanstalk. So I don't have the space to write it fully in here. It's Elastic Beanstalk. On GCP, GCP provides something called App Engine, and Azure provides something called Azure Web Apps. It's also called Azure App Service or Web Apps. So these are the PaaS offerings, the platform as a service offerings of the different cloud platforms. If you have any Java Spring Boot applications, you can easily deploy them to the cloud using these PaaS or platform as a service offerings from all these wonderful cloud providers. So now we looked at the high level, what is cloud, why do we need to go to cloud. We then looked at the two options that we have when we want to deploy simple applications to the cloud. We talked about infrastructure as a service, and then we talked about platform as a service. And we looked at the infrastructure as a service options provided by AWS, GCP and Azure, and we also looked at the platform as a service options which are provided by AWS, GCP and Azure. Now, one important thing to realize is these cloud platforms also offer platform as a service for your database. Actually, these take it to the next level, that you are only responsible for your data. So you are responsible just for the data, and all the other stuff, installing the database, installing the operating system and everything, that would be taken care of by the cloud provider. These services are called managed services. So a managed service is one where the cloud provider is going to take care of all the important features. So you'd want your database to be available all the time. So you'd want multiple instances of the database so that if one goes down, the other one is available. And you'd want typically backups, so that you would want automated backups, so that even if a crash happens, even if something happens, you can restore it back from a backup. So all these kind of features are provided by managed services by each of the cloud providers. If you look at AWS, if you want to create a MySQL database, then you can use relational database service. Azure provides something called Azure Database for MySQL. GCP also provides options for you to create managed services around MySQL. So if you want to create a MySQL in the cloud, it's just a click of few buttons and you'd have a MySQL instance which is highly available and also has high redundancy, so that you don't lose anything, and it's also automatically backed up. All these services you would get at a click of a button. Now, the other features which are provided by these platform as a service things, let's look at that in depth right now. Now, let's look at two important things. One is AWS Elastic Beanstalk. So that's something which we'll look in depth. And the other one which we'll look at in depth is Azure Web Apps. The interesting thing for you is that the App Engine, the Google App Engine, is actually one of the oldest platform as a service offerings. I think the first time I heard about Google App Engine was, I think, in the 2008 timeframe. It might even be 10 to 12 years now. But for me, I like the offerings from AWS Elastic Beanstalk and also the offering from Azure Web Apps a lot more. So in this video, we'll be talking about those two things in a little more depth. So when we talk about Elastic Beanstalk, some of the important concepts that you need to understand are application versions and application environments. You can have multiple versions of a single application, and having multiple versions would enable you to switch from one version to another version and all that stuff. You can have multiple environments in a single Elastic Beanstalk instance. That would allow you to have different environments for dev, QA stage and production. The amazing thing about Elastic Beanstalk is it supports deploying jar files. It supports deploying var files into Tomcat. It also supports deploying containers. So this is like a wide variety of things that you can deploy. You can create a Docker container and you can actually deploy it directly down to Elastic Beanstalk. One important thing to remember is, typically when I write EBS in the AWS world, it refers to Elastic Block Store. But over here, we are not talking about Elastic Block Store, but we are actually talking about Elastic Beanstalk. So it's Elastic Beanstalk. So that's what we are talking about in here. Elastic Block Store is something like your hard disk on the cloud. Elastic Beanstalk is a platform as a service offering from AWS. So whenever we write AWS EBS, as far as this video goes, we are talking about Elastic Beanstalk. So as far as the Elastic Beanstalk is concerned, it supports deploying jar files, var files. You can actually create a container. You can create a Docker image or a container image for your application, and you can actually deploy that to Elastic Beanstalk. The other things that you can do is you can use Elastic Beanstalk CLI, command line interface, to manage your application, to deploy a new version, to switch environments and all that stuff. The other important thing about Elastic Beanstalk is it also provides a number of release management of options. So you can do something like blue-green deployments. So when you do deployment, if you are switching from V1 to V2, you don't want to have any downtime. And blue-green deployments allow you to have zero downtime when you are actually doing a deployment for a new version. And also, typically EBS also supports all the features like load balancing and auto scaling. So load balancing, if you have multiple instances of the application, you'd want to be able to balance the load between them. And auto scaling is you'd want to be able to scale your infrastructure based on the load which is coming in. AWS EBS provides, actually AWS Elastic Beanstalk provides all these features inbuilt. And the other important thing about AWS, I'm out of space down here, so I'll move a little to the side and write it. You can also do CI/CD. So CI/CD inside the AWS world, we can do by using code build. So it's AWS code build and AWS code pipeline. So these are the two things that you can do, actually two things that you can use to do continuous integration and continuous deployment of your application. So if you have a GitHub repository and you want to deploy the application as soon as a change is committed into your GitHub repository, you can do that with AWS code build and code pipeline. Code build is used to build a var. So you deploy your code out to a Git repository, and then you would actually take the deployable unit. So the code build would help you in building the var, and the code pipeline would help you to deploy it to a Elastic Beanstalk environment. Now, Azure Web Apps also provides very similar features to AWS Elastic Beanstalk. In Azure Web Apps, one of the important concepts that you need to understand is something called App Service Plans. So in Azure Web Apps, actually App Service Plans, inside App Service Plans, you would have a number of applications, and each of these applications can have multiple slots. So an App Service Plan is basically a request from you to say, I would want this much amount of infrastructure with these features. There are a variety of plans, F1, B1, you have B2, B3, you have something called P1, V1. So these are the different plans which are present. Each of these plans have different capabilities. So some of these plans with, you can have multiple environments. Some of these plans you can have support for a lot of scaling. Some of these plans come with automated backups. And the other thing which is different for each of these plans is the capacity. So the capacity, by capacity I mean CPU, amount of CPU available, amount of memory available. All these are different for each of these app service plans. So the first thing that you choose whenever we want to do something in Azure App Service, or whenever you want to use Azure Web Apps, is to choose an app service plan. You choose the app service plan based on what capabilities you would want and what capacity you would want, how much CPU you want, how much memory you want. Do you want to have multiple environments? Do you want to be able to auto scale to 100 instances? So all those are the factors which decide which app service plan you would want to go for. And once you decide the app service plan, you can have multiple applications deployed as part of your app service plan. One important thing about Azure Web Apps is the fact that as soon as you choose an app service plan, if you'd say, I need X amount of CPU and Y amount of memory, As soon as you put the request out, from that moment on, whether you deploy any apps or not, you are charged for it. So make sure that you start your app service plan at the right moment. So inside your app service plans, you can have multiple applications deployed. So if you have 10 Spring Boot applications, you can actually deploy them all as part of a single app service plan. And each of these apps can have multiple environments. These environments are called slots. So if you go for a free tier, so F1 stands for a free app service plan, a free tier will not have multiple slots, but B1 and P1 V1 would have multiple slots so that you can have multiple environments. So in Azure, one other important concept that you need to understand is something called resource groups. So a resource is nothing but something, a virtual server, application, database, anything that you create is called a resource. And in Azure, you can use resource groups to group your resources and get them together. So you can delete all these resources together. So if I have, let's say I have a number of resources which are associated with a single application. I can group them into a single resource group, and I can manage the resource group. I can delete it and things like that. The amazing thing about Azure is it also has a Maven plugin. So with the Azure Maven plugin, you can actually easily deploy your applications like Spring Boot applications out to Azure. It also supports blue-green deployments, so that's it's something which it's similar to the EBS stuff. So this is also supported, and also it has good support for auto scaling and load balancing. In the B1 plan, it supports, I think, auto scaling up to 3 instances, if I remember it right. I'm not exactly sure about the numbers, but one of these plans supports up to 3 instances, and the higher plans support up to 20 or 100 instances. So load balancing and auto scaling come for free when you go for Azure Web Apps. The idea behind this video was to give a big picture overview of how you can deploy Spring Boot applications to the cloud. In this video, we were talking about very simple applications like a full stack application or a web application or a REST API. All these have a single jar file or a WAR file, and we looked at the options you have to deploy a jar file or a WAR file and connect it to a simple database. We talked about the infrastructure as a service, we talked about platform as a service, and we talked about the different platform as a service offerings that are provided by the different cloud providers. We also talked about the fact that these platform as a service features also support blue-green deployments, like a variety of deployment strategies so that you don't have any downtime. They also come up with auto scaling and load balancing capabilities. You can also do continuous integration and continuous delivery. The option, actually we forgot to talk about the option in Azure. The option in Azure to actually do CI/CD is called Azure DevOps. Oops, how can I forget that? Let's take care of that right now. I hope this video gives you a good overview of the entire landscape on how to deploy simple applications. Now, think about what can you do next? What would be the next steps? The other things that you might want to learn are microservices. How do you deploy microservices to cloud? And also, how do you do container orchestration? So Docker, Kubernetes, and microservices are things which might be really interesting for you to get an overview of. And I'll put a link to the playlist, which would give you a link to the videos where we talk about that in the description of the video. One of the frequently asked questions for us is, how do I become a full stack developer? How do I become a microservices developer? How do I learn the cloud? How do I become an expert on AWS? The amazing thing is we have learning paths built for each of these, and these learning paths contain what are the skills you would need, what is the learning path, how can you start, what can you do next, what can you do everything to achieve your goal, and also these learning paths contain videos and course recommendations with these things. You can find a link to these learning paths in the description of this particular video, and you can check out whichever learning path you would want. For example, the learning path 05 is the one which makes you an expert on AWS. So it has the recommended skills, it has the prerequisite skills, It has the recommended course path, and also it has recommended preview courses. These are free courses you can do, and also it has links to the other learning paths as well. We recommend you to make the best use of these learning paths to make sure that you stay ahead of the curve. Keep learning in 28 minutes. Until the next video, bye bye.